Evelyn Harper first glimpsed Cinder Flats from the crest of Rattlesnake Ridge. Its 3 lonely buildings crouched beneath a copper-shaded sky. Wind scraped over the chaparral, lifting swirls of dust that glittered like sparks around the sun. She adjusted the leather strap of her camera case, felt the tug of sweat beneath her collar, and reminded herself, out loud, so the canyon walls could hear, that she was no longer a Pinkerton agent chasing ghosts. She was a wandering photographer, nothing more. The lie tasted dry, but she repeated it anyway as she led her bay mare down the slope. Nobody came this far west unless they were running from something. Creditors, memories, the hangman's patience. Evelyn carried all 3 at her heels. At the foot of the ridge a hand-painted sign, half buried in sand, welcomed travelers with a single chipped word: supplies. The S had flaked away, leaving UPPLIS like a weary command to keep moving. Evelyn tied the mare to a rail that creaked the way old men pray, soft, desperate, resigned, and stepped inside the mercantile. He clung to the room. Shelves sagged beneath jars of dust-clouded beans, cracked lantern chimneys, and single Bibles swollen with humidity. Behind the counter stood a boy no older than 16, freckles splattered across his nose like buckshot. A Colt Navy revolver rested within reach of his thin fingers. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, voice steady but eyes tracking every twitch of her hand. "We don't get visitors. You lost." "Just thirsty," Evelyn answered, peeling a coin from her purse. "Water and whatever passes for coffee around here." He poured tepid water from a clay jug. "Coffee's a memory. Stage stopped running months ago." "Then water will do," she said, drinking in slow, measured swallows while scanning the shelves for remedies. Carbolic acid, laudanum, bandage roll, none present. "Town physician gone, too?" "Didn't have one. Folks patch themselves or pray. Unless you count Mr. Finch, he claims he can stitch a wound, but mostly he bottles lightning in corn liquor." Evelyn nodded. No doctor, limited supplies, one armed adolescent. If trouble arrived, the place would unravel fast. A thunderous crack split the silence. Both flinched. The boy's hand flew to the revolver. Outside, Evelyn heard the unmistakable wheeze of a steam whistle followed by hoofbeats, heavy, urgent. She moved to the door and glimpsed a plume of black smoke curling beyond the hill, as though the desert itself had lit a fuse. "Rail spur's been dead 2 years," the boy whispered. "So what the hell is that?" Evelyn's pulse kicked like a mule. Somewhere beyond the ridge something iron-shod was coming, something that hadn't existed yesterday. Her instincts, dormant only minutes, sharpened like fresh-ground steel. She tightened the strap of her camera, feeling the hidden weight of the small derringer nested beneath. "Lock your door, kid," she said, stepping out into the heat. "Looks like Cinder Flats just got interesting." In the street, she counted the echoes, 12 hoofbeats, maybe more, converging alongside the distant clatter of gears. Wind carried the scent of coal and rust, a smell she remembered from burned bridges outside Memphis, from payroll cars robbed and torched by men who smiled while they did it. She raised her camera and captured a fragment of orange sky, the shutter snapping like a nervous heartbeat, and told herself it was evidence, not art. The horizon answered with another plume of smoke, taller now, darker, as though the world beyond the hills was on fire and hurrying her way. The riders appeared first, long shadows on the horizon, galloping hard, a dozen or more cutting fast across the flats. Behind them rolled the source of the smoke, a makeshift railcar bolted atop a wheeled wagon, its engine coughing smoke and sparks like a drunk dragon. The whole contraption shuddered with every bump, yet somehow kept pace with the riders. Evelyn ducked behind the water trough, peering over the edge as the first horsemen thundered into view. They wore oilskin dusters and mismatched hats, faces masked in red kerchiefs. Bandoliers crossed their chests like stitched scars. These weren't drifters or scouts. They were raiders. She cursed under her breath. A tall figure with silver conchos lining his sleeves reined in at the center of town. He dismounted with a practiced swing and barked an order to the others, who quickly fanned out, rifles slung low. Evelyn counted 13. One headed straight for the store. She heard the boy inside bolt the door too late. The outlaw kicked it open. Wood splintered. The boy shouted. Evelyn was already moving, ducking around the back of the trough, hand on the derringer hidden beneath her vest. But she paused. A gunshot inside the store rang out, a single, sharp report. Then silence. The tall leader turned and called to the rail wagon, which rolled to a stop in the center of Cinder Flats with a hiss of steam. From its rear door emerged a second figure, shorter, broader, wrapped in a tattered officer's coat. His beard was singed at the tips, and his left hand was wrapped in blood-soaked gauze. He walked with a limp, but carried himself like a man, used to commanding. When he spoke, the others listened. "We don't need to stay long," he said, voice raspy but calm. "Get the supplies. Check every building. And find the woman." Evelyn's heart jolted. The woman? They didn't know her name. But they were looking for her. That meant one thing. Her trail wasn't as cold as she'd hoped. Someone had followed her from Colorado. She slipped between two buildings, boots silent on the sand, eyes scanning for cover. The saloon stood abandoned to the east, its batwing doors swaying in the wind. She made for it, dodging through shadows, pressing against walls. A drunk's body still lay slumped on the porch, no breath, no blood. He'd been dead a while. Inside it was dark and cool. She crouched behind the bar and drew her pistol. One shot. That was all the Derringer held. She considered her options, wait and watch, or try to make it to her horse and bolt. Neither sounded promising. The outlaws moved fast, rifling through the mercantile and what passed for a sheriff's office. One of them yelled he'd found a map. Another came out with a sack of tinned food. From the center of town, the leader barked again. "Hurry! She's close. Harper ain't the type to vanish." Harper. They knew her name after all. Her stomach turned to ice. The last time someone used her real name, she'd left 3 bodies cooling beside a train depot. That was 2 territories and 1,000 miles ago. She tightened her grip on the pistol, pulse in her throat, and took a breath. The past wasn't done with her, not yet. And if she had any hope of surviving Cinder Flats, she'd have to stop running and start fighting. Evelyn counted the seconds between footsteps, the creak of boards outside the saloon forming a slow heartbeat she could almost match to her own. Through a crack in the shutters, she saw the outlaw with silver conchos, Marshall Kane, if rumors from Leadville were to be believed, striding toward the well, tipping water over his kerchief before tying it round his neck again. The wind flipped one edge, revealing a face scored by 3 parallel scars that glowed pale against sun-browned skin. A souvenir, Evelyn guessed, from someone who tried to carve the ferrule out of him and failed. Inside the saloon, heat spiraled upward in shimmering columns, dragging the sour fumes of stale whiskey with it. Evelyn's nostrils burned. She shifted, careful not to rattle the broken glass scattered across the floor, and slid further behind an overturned poker table. One shot in her Derringer. One. She needed leverage, not bravery. Her eyes darted to the staircase at the back of the room. Upstairs, the balconies connected all the guest rooms. From there, she could look down on the street, maybe get to the water tower ladder, and, if luck wasn't just another liar, reach her horse. She tucked the pistol beneath her belt, rolled to a crouch, and padded toward the stairs. Halfway up, a board squeaked like a mouse meeting its god. She froze. Voices drifted in from outside. "Can't ride the rail rig much farther," grumbled the bearded man in the tattered officer's coat, Captain Sloan, ex-Union artillery, if Evelyn's memory served. Boilers cracked. "We scavenge what we need, then we ride for the Red Basin." Kane spat. "Not without Harper." "That camera of hers," Sloan said, as though savoring the idea, "is rumored to hold plates worth more than gold. And the agency still pays for her head if the negatives are destroyed." Evelyn's stomach clenched. The negatives hidden inside her saddlebag weren't plates of blackmail or bank ledgers. They were photographs of dead men in federal uniforms, taken as proof of a massacre whitewashed from military reports. Pictures that might bury a general and absolve a regiment of Buffalo soldiers framed for treason. Pinkerton had been hired to make those images vanish. She'd refused, so Pinkerton had tried to erase her instead. A boot thumped against the saloon doors. Evelyn darted up the last steps and ducked into the first room. Dust-veiled sunlight slanted through lace curtains onto a brass bed frame twisted like barbed wire. She slipped to the balcony rail and peered down. Only 2 sentries stood guard in the street now. The others ransacked buildings for food and ammunition. Sloan knelt beside the rail rig, tightening a valve with his good hand. A faint hiss told Evelyn the boiler was indeed leaking steam. If she could reach the water tower and drop a lantern into the tank, the gush might flood their engine or, better yet, scald their powder stores. A floorboard groaned behind her. She spun. A girl no older than 12, hair hanging in twin raven braids, stared at Evelyn from the doorway, clutching a wooden slingshot. Terror widened the child's eyes, but her chin stayed high. "You ain't one of 'em," the girl whispered. I'm not, Evelyn breathed. Are you alone? The girl shook her head and pointed to the closet. Evelyn nudged it open with her elbow. Inside, a woman cradled an infant, hand pressed to the baby's mouth to keep it silent. Eyes met eyes. Shared fear forged instant trust. What's your name? Evelyn asked the girl. Juniper. Juniper, listen. I'm going to get those men out of town. I need you to stay quiet until you hear bells, like church bells. When you hear them, run for the east arroyo. Follow the dry creek until you reach the cottonwoods. Understand? The girl hesitated, then nodded. Mama can't walk fast. Baby's sick. Evelyn's gaze flicked to the infant's flushed cheeks. Fever. No doctor in Cinder Flats, but laudanum in her saddlebag might buy time. If she could reach it. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Voices, two men. Evelyn closed the closet, pressed a finger to her lips. She backed onto the balcony, swung over the railing, and dropped onto the awning below. Canvas sagged under her weight, but held. She slid to the edge and landed in the alley, knees jarring. No alarm yet. She sprinted, hugging the wall until the water tower's ladder loomed. Behind her, a shout shattered the quiet. Someone had found the empty room. Rifle bolts slammed forward. She scaled the ladder, boots ringing hollow on iron rungs. Bullets pinged off the tower legs, showering her with rust flakes. She reached the catwalk, heart hammering. From up here, the town looked like a spilled model. Sun-bleached roofs, scattering riders, and in the center that rail rig belching dark smoke, its engine the outlaw's heartbeat. Evelyn pulled the derringer, cocked the hammer, aimed at a dangling lantern hooked to the tower's support beam. One shot, one hope. A breath. She fired. Flame blossomed, glass shattered, oil whooshed down the wooden leg like molten gold. The tower groaned. Steam from the boiler below shrieked as fire met leaking pressure. A thunderclap rattled the desert, then the rail rig erupted in a plume of scalding vapor and sparks. Horses reared. Men screamed. Evelyn dropped the smoking pistol, seized the bell rope tied to the catwalk, and rang it with every ounce of strength. Metal clamored, echoing across Cinder Flats like Judgment Day. In the alley, Juniper bolted with her mother and baby brother toward the arroyo. Evelyn saw Kane wheeling to track them, rifle rising, while Sloane staggered through boiling steam, half his coat in flames. Evelyn grabbed the ladder and began her descent. She was out of bullets, out of breath, but not out of fight, not yet. Evelyn hit the ground running, lungs burning, boots pounding across packed earth scorched by the firestorm she had unleashed. Screams echoed off saloon walls, mingling with the screech of wounded horses and the groan of the crippled rail rig. Smoke clawed at the sky like a dying thing. Behind her, outlaws scattered in confusion, some diving for cover, others firing wildly into the air as if the explosion had summoned ghosts. She kept low, weaving between barrels and broken fences, heading for the livery stable where her horse, Bran, stood tethered and pawing at the ground in agitation. Evelyn flung the gate open and was met with a blast of heat and the panicked snorts of animals desperate to flee. Bran reared, nearly pulling free, but Evelyn grabbed the reins and held on. Easy, boy. We're getting out of this mess. She slung herself into saddle just as Kane's voice boomed across the square. She's alive. Stop her. 3 riders pivoted at once, spurring their mounts toward the stables. Evelyn yanked Bran's reins hard, sending him into a sharp turn as bullets thudded into the beams overhead. Splinters rained around her. With a cry, she drove Bran forward, smashing through the back gate into the open plain beyond. Dust exploded around them. Evelyn leaned low, one hand gripping the saddle horn, the other holding tight to her satchel. The negatives inside slapped against her ribs like a second heartbeat. The arroyo wasn't far. Juniper and her family had vanished into its shadows minutes before. Evelyn prayed they'd made it to the cottonwoods. She angled Bran toward a ridge where the rocks formed a natural funnel, a choke point. If the riders followed her, she could slow them down. Just enough. Gunfire cracked behind her. One bullet tore past her cheek, another slammed into the saddle's cantle. She gritted her teeth, reached into her satchel, and pulled the small bundle of phosphorus matches she'd tucked there weeks ago in Denver. A last resort. As Bran reached the mouth of a narrow pass, Evelyn struck a match against her boot and tossed it into a dried mesquite bush. Flames leapt, racing across dry tinder like lightning. Smoke billowed. Another match. Another bush. The riders slowed behind her, coughing, swerving through rising fire. Evelyn pressed Bran harder. The ground trembled beneath his hooves as they climbed a steep rise. From the top, she turned, just for a moment, and saw the outlaws bottlenecked in the pass, horses rearing, men shouting, smoke blotting out the sun. But Cain wasn't among them, which meant he'd taken another path. As if summoned by her thought, a gunshot cracked from the ridge to her left. The bullet hit Bran's rear leg, not enough to bring him down, but enough to stagger him. Evelyn cried out as the horse faltered and nearly toppled. She rolled free, hitting the dust hard and tumbling down a shallow slope. Her satchel flew from her shoulder, bouncing once, twice, then disappearing into a thicket of rocks. She scrambled to her knees, just in time to see Cain walking toward her through the smoke, rifle lowered, eyes like slivers of hammered steel. "You made a mess, Harper." She backed away slowly, hand drifting toward her boot. "I've done worse." He smirked. "I don't doubt it. You won't get the negatives." "Don't need 'em," he said. "They're burned, like the rest of this hellhole will be. Agency only wants you. Alive if possible. Dead if convenient." Evelyn's fingers found the boot knife, for inches of sharpened will. She threw it. Cain swatted it aside with the butt of his rifle. Then a slingshot cracked from somewhere behind him. The rock hit square between his shoulder blades. He grunted, staggered forward, just enough for Evelyn to charge. She slammed into him with her full weight, driving her elbow into his side. They hit the ground in a tangle, rolling toward the drop. Cain recovered first, dragging her upright by the collar. "You should have died in Carson Bluffs," he growled. "I did," Evelyn hissed. "This is what came back." Her fist connected with his jaw. He reeled. And then Juniper's voice cried out, high and terrified, from the ridge above. "Mama fell." Evelyn's blood iced. She turned. Cain aimed. Evelyn didn't think. She launched herself sideways, just as Cain pulled the trigger. The shot echoed like thunder in a canyon. Dust exploded inches from her shoulder. She hit the slope and rolled, skidding to stop behind a boulder already peppered with bullet holes. Juniper screamed again. Evelyn's eyes snapped to the ridge. The girl was crouched beside her mother, who had slipped down a sheer bank and now lay motionless at the edge of a drop-off. The baby was crying somewhere close, its wails sharp and jagged, like broken glass. Cain advanced with grim purpose, rifle lowered but ready. Evelyn knew he was gauging her movements, watching for the moment she'd try to run or stand. He wasn't in a rush. Wolves never were. "Kids next," he called calmly, voice slithering between rocks. "Give it up, Harper." The name echoed inside her skull, like an oath. She looked at the ridge again. Juniper's eyes found hers, wide, wet, terrified, but unbroken. Evelyn had seen that look before, in soldiers on bloodied fields, in women dragging wounded children through burning towns, in her own reflection once long ago. She drew a breath. Then she stood. Cain grinned, rifle steady. "There's the ghost I remember." Evelyn raised her hands. "You want the truth, Cain? You never buried me deep enough." He started forward, boots crunching dry shale. "That's the thing about ghosts," she went on. "Sometimes they dig their way back." With a sudden twist, she lunged, not at Cain, but for her satchel lying just beyond the rock line. She slid into it like a baseball player stealing home, tore open a flap, and yanked out a metal flask filled not with water but lamp oil. Cain raised the rifle. Too slow. Evelyn hurled the flask. It struck his chest, oil splashing across his duster. In the same motion, she scraped her last match and flicked it forward. Flame bloomed. Cain screamed, staggering backward, rolling in the dirt. His coat blazed like a fallen star. Evelyn didn't wait. She sprinted past him toward the ridge, past the black smoke, past the stench of scorched wool and skin. Juniper clutched her baby brother now, tears streaking her cheeks. Her mother was barely conscious, bleeding from the head. Evelyn knelt, checked the woman's pulse. Weak but there. She threw her satchel over her shoulder and hoisted the mother up, gritting her teeth as the woman's weight leaned into her. "Can you walk?" she asked through clenched jaw. The woman blinked. "Try." Juniper grabbed Evelyn's sleeve. "The canyon behind the rocks. There's a trail." Evelyn nodded. "Lead us." They moved slowly, Juniper guiding, Evelyn half carrying the mother. Gunfire rang out in the distance, panic shots, likely Sloane's crew, realizing their plan, was unraveling. But Evelyn knew better than to believe it was over. They reached the canyon mouth, where red rocks opened into a narrow ravine dotted with yucca and snake grass. The shadows were longer now. Dusk crept like a thief. At a bend in the trail, they stopped to rest. Evelyn set the woman down gently, handed Juniper a strip of jerky from her coat pocket, then scanned the horizon. Nothing but wind and grit. Until hoofbeats. 3 of them. Fast. Evelyn rose slowly, pulling the pistol cane, had dropped in the scuffle. Empty. She checked her satchel, no rounds. Then a voice called down from the ridge, Evelyn Harper. She froze. The rider who came into view wore a U.S. cavalry coat, but the badge on his chest bore a buffalo stamped into silver. His horse snorted, tossing its head. "I was told you might be heading this way," he said. "Name's Deputy Ezra Lane. Colonel James sent me. Said if I found you, to give you this." He tossed something down. Evelyn caught it. A folded paper. She opened it, a writ of safe passage signed and sealed by Colonel James himself, and below that, a note scrawled in dark ink. "Harper, I trust you've still got those negatives. If so, I suggest you get them to New Mexico before the agency catches its breath. They'll come harder next time. J." Evelyn exhaled, chest heaving. The road west had just opened again, but wouldn't stay open long. She looked at the ravine stretching before her, then at Juniper and her family, strangers who'd become tethered to her fate by fire and blood. "Well," she muttered, adjusting her satchel. "Time to disappear again." Evelyn, Juniper, and the others rode with Deputy Ezra Lane under a bruised purple sky, the sun smoldering like a coal as it dipped below the distant mesas. The baby had stopped crying, lulled by motion and exhaustion, and Juniper had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder. Evelyn rode behind them on Bran, who limped slightly but held steady. They followed a forgotten cattle trail that wound between bluffs and dry arroyos, lit only by twilight and the occasional flash of moonlight reflected in shallow pools. Lane rode ahead, his wide-brimmed hat tipped low, but Evelyn noticed how often he glanced behind, checking, she realized, not for stragglers but for pursuers. "Expecting company?" she asked finally. He didn't look back. "Not tonight. But word travels faster than dust in these parts. You stirred up something loud, Harper. Didn't have much choice." "I know. Colonel James figured that might happen. That's why he sent me." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And where exactly are we headed?" Lane pointed to the horizon. "A mining ghost town called Calico Hollow, just over the border. Abandoned since the silver ran dry. James set up a safe house in the old assay office. Place has cellars deep enough to bury secrets." "Good," Evelyn muttered. "I'm full of those." They made camp near a cluster of boulders ringed with mesquite. The fire was small, just enough to boil water and warm bones, but Lane kept it banked and shielded with his saddle blanket. As Evelyn tended to Bran's leg, she caught Lane watching her. "You ever think about just letting it all go?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. The night stretched around them, full of silence and crickets and the occasional distant howl. "No," she finally said, "because they don't." Lane nodded as if he understood, then passed her a tin cup of black coffee. It tasted like ash and strength. After Juniper and her family fell asleep, Evelyn pulled out the satchel and unwrapped the oilskin bundle. Inside lay a half-dozen glass negatives, each one etched with ghosts. Men in blue coats piled in a ravine. A burning encampment. A woman holding a child beneath a torn Union flag. She had taken those photos with a heavy camera and heavier heart. And ever since, men had hunted her for them. "You planning to publish?" Lane asked quietly, glancing at the images. "Not yet," she replied. "Not until I know they'll reach someone who won't bury the truth again." Lane nodded. "James has a contact. Editor in Santa Fe. Name's Calder. Runs a printing press that the Army can't bully." Evelyn looked up sharply. "You trust him?" "With my life. James already sent a rider ahead. Calder will be waiting." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire with her coat pulled tight and watched shadows shift along the canyon rim. For a moment, she imagined she saw Kane standing there, smoke still trailing from his coat, eyes gleaming with the promise of unfinished business. But it was only a cedar tree swaying in the wind. Still, she kept her hand near her pistol until dawn. By late morning, they reached Calico Hollow. The town looked as if it had been dropped from the sky and forgotten. Shutters banged in the wind. Rusted rail tracks vanished into a hill. The old assay office, perched beside a dry well, still bore its sign, half burned and hanging crooked. Inside it was cool and dry. The cellar was deeper than Evelyn expected, lined with crates of mining tools and barrels long emptied of saltpeter and pitch. She hid the negatives beneath a false floor, Lane uncovered with his boot. "They'll be safe here," he said. Evelyn ran a hand over the wood, feeling the press of years against her fingertips. "Nothing stays hidden forever," she murmured. Lane gave her a look. "That's the point." A whistle cut through the air. Evelyn froze. Lane stiffened. Then a rider galloped into view, a thin woman in a long duster with a hawk feather tucked into her hat. She pulled up hard, dust billowing behind her. "You Lane," she barked. He stepped forward. "Yeah. What's the news?" "They're on the move," she said. "Agency men. Half a dozen at least. Passed through Quartz Hill yesterday, asking about a red-haired ghost with a satchel full of sins." "Sound familiar?" Lane's jaw tightened. "How far behind?" 2 days, maybe less." The woman's eyes slid to Evelyn. "So you're Harper. Heard stories." Evelyn sighed. "They're all true, except the ones that aren't." "Well," the woman said, swinging back into her saddle, "best you don't make camp too long." As she rode off, Evelyn turned to Lane. "You still think that cellar's deep enough?" He smirked. "Only one way to find out." 2 nights passed in Calico Hollow, but Evelyn slept little. The air in the cellar was cool but thick with the scent of coal dust and something older, forgotten time, maybe, or ghosts who'd never bothered to leave. Juniper and her family rested in the upstairs room, where broken window panes let in moonlight and silence. Lane kept watch from the roof with a spyglass and a shotgun across his lap. On the 3rd morning, the wind shifted. Evelyn smelled it first. Ash. Not from their campfire, which had long since been buried, but carried in from the east, thin tendrils of smoke winding over the hills like warnings written in the sky. Lane climbed down from the roof, jaw set tight. "They're coming." Evelyn already had her coat on, and the negative slung beneath her shirt in a fresh oilskin pouch. "How many?" 7 riders. Black horses. Dusters. No flags. Agency. He nodded. "No time to run. We make a stand." Evelyn turned to Juniper's mother, who stood pale and trembling in the corner, cradling her baby. "There's a tunnel in the cellar, behind the coal bins. It'll lead you west, comes out near a box canyon about 2 miles from here. Take Juniper and go. Now." The woman hesitated. "What about you?" "I've been running longer than anyone should. It's time I stopped." Lane handed her a Spencer rifle. "That goes for both of us." The mother disappeared into the cellar, Juniper clutching her hand and staring at Evelyn until the last second. Evelyn nodded at her once. Then the trapdoor closed. They took positions in the assay office, Lane at the 2nd floor window with his shotgun, Evelyn on the main floor with the Spencer trained on the door. The sun was rising, bleeding gold into the broken streets of Calico Hollow. And then the riders came. They approached in silence, 7 men dressed in black, their coats rippling like flags of mourning. Their horses moved in eerie unison, hooves muffled on the dust-choked road. One of them, taller than the rest, wore a bowler hat and carried a polished cane. He dismounted slowly, as if savoring the moment. He knocked on the assay office door with the tip of his cane. "Knock, knock, knock." "Miss Harper," he called. His voice was smooth, practiced, an actor reading a familiar line. "This will be the 3rd time I've asked you politely." Evelyn didn't answer. "We're not here to kill you," he went on. "At least not yet. We simply want the negatives. You hand them over, we walk away. Everyone lives." Still nothing. Lane's voice called from upstairs. "You ever known a man to walk away from a lie that good?" The bowler-hatted man smiled. "Have it your way." He turned and flicked his hand. Gunfire exploded from 3 directions. Windows shattered. Walls buckled. Evelyn ducked as a bullet punched through the doorframe and splintered the table beside her. Lane returned fire, dropping one of the blackcoats from his horse with a clean shot to the chest. Evelyn rolled across the floor and fired through the lower window, hitting a 2nd rider in the leg. He toppled, screaming, and was dragged several feet before falling limp. 2 down. Lane shouted, "But they're flanking." Another round shattered the 2nd-floor shutters. Lane cursed as a round clipped his shoulder. Evelyn dragged a desk in front of the door and kept firing, counting each round like rosary beads, for 5, 6, reload. The bowler-hatted man stepped into view again, untouched by the chaos. "You think you're exposing truth, Miss Harper," he called. "But truth's just a story with better lighting." She took aim, but he vanished behind a wagon. Lane stumbled down the stairs, bleeding. "They're breaching the back." Evelyn shoved the rifle into his hands and unslung her satchel. "Then we fall back." "To where?" She lifted the trapdoor. "The tunnel." They dropped into the dark, sealing the hatch behind them just as the front door shattered under booted feet. In the narrow crawl space, Lane grunted in pain. "We can't outrun them." Evelyn lit a lantern. "We don't have to. Just outlast them." They moved in silence, the tunnel damp and sloped. The baby cried once in the distance, far ahead, and Evelyn prayed they were still safe. At last they reached the end, a collapsed mine shaft just wide enough to crawl through. As they emerged into the ravine beyond, Evelyn paused, turned, and lit a final lantern. She left it behind in the tunnel, wick burning low, perched atop a keg of old mining powder Lane had spotted earlier. As they reached open ground, a muffled boom echoed behind them, sealing the tunnel in a plume of dust and flame. Lane collapsed beside a cactus, panting. That should slow them down. Evelyn adjusted her satchel, eyes scanning the desert. "They're not done, and neither are we." The desert beyond the mine opened into a wide basin, cracked earth sprawling toward distant buttes under a sun as pale as bone. Evelyn and Lane moved quickly, but Lane's wound slowed them. Blood soaked through the linen she'd tied around his shoulder, and every few steps he staggered, jaw clenched against the pain. "We need shelter," he muttered. Evelyn nodded. "There's a box canyon ahead. If Juniper's mother made it through, that's where she'll be." By noon, the sun sat high and mean. Buzzards wheeled above like sentinels. The only sound was the wind scratching across dead sagebrush and Lane's uneven breath. Then Evelyn saw it, a flash of color between two stone outcroppings. She raised a hand. "There." They approached cautiously, rifles ready. But when they rounded the boulders, relief swept through her like a river breaking a dam. Juniper stood beside her mother, who knelt in the shade with the baby cradled in her arms. The infant slept. Juniper's face lit up when she saw Evelyn. "You came." "I said I would." Lane dropped beside a rock with a grunt, letting the sun bake the blood from his sleeve. The woman Maria, Evelyn had learned, looked at Evelyn with tired, grateful eyes. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet," Evelyn said. "But we don't have long. They'll find the tunnel. Maybe hours." Juniper looked at the canyon walls, nervously. "We can't run again. Mama's tired. Baby too." Evelyn crouched beside the girl. "Then we make them come to us. But on our terms." They worked fast. Using scraps from old fencing and the remains of a rotted wagon, Evelyn and Lane built a crude barricade across the canyon mouth. With Juniper's help, they buried glass shards in the sand, laid rocks to trip horses, and wedged oil-drenched rags into the cracks of the boulders. If they came, the canyon would become a trap. Lane carved a signal on a flat stone near the entrance, a crescent moon beneath a broken star. It was a sign once used by Buffalo soldiers to mark safeholds. A message if others came searching. At dusk, Evelyn climbed the narrow ridge above the canyon and set up her camera. Lane raised an eyebrow. "Now's the time you want to take pictures." "Always," she said. "One day people will want proof of what was done out here. What men like them did." "And what you did," Lane added. Evelyn didn't answer. She adjusted the lens and took 3 photos of the canyon mouth, the barricades, and the endless horizon beyond. Then she descended in silence. That night, coyotes sang to the stars. The fire was kept low. Maria sang softly to the baby in Spanish, a song Evelyn didn't recognize, but somehow understood. It was about longing, about staying brave when you have nothing left to hold except the ones beside you. Lane leaned against the canyon wall, shotgun across his lap. He was pale but alert. "Why'd you really take those pictures, Harper?" he asked in the quiet. Evelyn stared into the fire. "Because someone had to. Because they told me not to." "Still think you'll make it out of this alive?" She smiled faintly. "That was never part of the plan." Footsteps echoed down the canyon mouth. Evelyn stood, rifle in hand. Figures appeared in the dark, 4, maybe 5, moving like shadows. Their coats fluttered like wings. One carried a lantern. Another had a carbine drawn. Evelyn spotted the bowler, hat gleaming in firelight. Kane wasn't among them, but she knew his kind. Men who didn't stop, even when fire took their coats and bullets took their friends. They'd rebuilt whatever force she'd scattered, and now they were here, again, chasing truth with loaded barrels. Lane lifted his shotgun. Maria clutched her children close. Evelyn stepped forward, raising her voice into the canyon's still air. "You're trespassing on federal ground." The men hesitated. Evelyn continued, "This canyon's claimed under writ and seal. I've got testimony, negatives, and a deputy with a badge full of reasons not to miss." The bowler-hatted man said nothing. Then calmly, he raised a flare gun and fired it into the sky. The flare bloomed like a blood-red flower. From the mesa above, Evelyn heard the distant rumble of hooves, more than she could count. Dozens, maybe. They weren't alone anymore. The flare's glow faded, but its message lingered. Reinforcements were coming. And they weren't cavalry. Evelyn tightened her grip on the Spencer rifle as the bowler-hatted man stepped into the firelight, his face calm, composed, unnervingly clean for a man hunting ghosts through ash and blood. "I gave you your chance, Harper," he said, voice smooth as river rock. "But you've chosen war." Evelyn didn't move. "No, I chose truth. War came looking for me." Behind her, Lane chambered a shell into his shotgun. The sound echoed loud in the canyon's stillness. The man raised his hand. Evelyn was ready for a barrage, but none came. Instead, from the ridge above, a second flare soared into the air, this one gold. Lane straightened. "That's not theirs." From shadows above the canyon mouth, a whistle pierced the dark, sharp, rising, familiar. Buffalo soldiers. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, then 4, then more, at least 20 in all, silhouettes crowned in dust and moonlight. At their head rode a stocky man in a weathered blue coat with silver insignia on each shoulder, Colonel James. Evelyn exhaled. Lane grinned despite the pain. "Told you he'd come." The bowler-hatted man's expression didn't change, but Evelyn saw the tension not in his jaw. His hand dropped from a flare gun. Colonel James raised a bullhorn. "This canyon is under federal protection. All armed trespassers are to dismount and disarm immediately." No one moved. "I repeat," James called, "this is your only warning." The bowler-hatted man didn't look back at his own riders. He simply turned toward Evelyn, eyes gleaming with a peculiar mix of admiration and contempt. "This isn't over," he said softly. Evelyn raised her rifle. "Yes, it is." He whistled once, sharply, and his men vanished into the rocks like smoke. The thunder of hooves echoed as they fled the canyon. Within moments, Colonel James's unit descended like a curtain falling on a final act. They surrounded the camp with quiet efficiency. Lanterns lit, rifles lowered, uniforms gleamed beneath dust and starlight. James dismounted, boots crunching the gravel. "Harper," he greeted, offering a hand. "Damn good to see you still breathing." "Not for lack of effort otherwise," she replied. He glanced at the satchels slung across her chest. "You still have them?" She nodded. "Good," he said. "Then maybe it was all worth it." At dawn, as the fires cooled and Maria finally slept with the baby nestled beside her, Evelyn met James by the canyon's edge. "They'll keep coming," she said. He nodded. "But they won't find you again. We'll move you to a safe post down in the New Mexico territory. Calder's press is ready. The plates will be published within the week." Will they believe them? Doesn't matter. It'll be truth on paper, and that's more dangerous than bullets some days. She looked out across the desert. "What happens after?" James hesitated. "We offer you a new name. A clean record. Start over." Evelyn almost smiled. "I've been so many names I'm not sure I'd recognize my own." He looked at her carefully. "You ever think about joining the Bureau?" She blinked. "You're joking. I've seen your work. I've seen what you're willing to risk. People like you don't come along often. Think about it." Evelyn didn't answer. Not yet. Juniper came running up the path then, cheeks pink with wind, a tin cup in hand. "There's fresh water down by the stones," she said, beaming. "And one of the soldiers gave me a harmonica." Evelyn laughed, the sound foreign in her own throat. "Play it for us tonight, partner," she said. Juniper nodded solemnly. "I will." As the sun climbed, the canyon began to empty. Soldiers packed. Horses saddled. Tracks pointed south. Evelyn stood in the center of it all, camera in one hand, satchel in the other, and stared down a future still unwritten. This wasn't an ending. It was the edge of something new. 3 days later, under a slate-gray sky that threatened rain, Evelyn rode into Las Piedras, a sleepy outpost nestled between sandstone cliffs and mesquite hills. The town wore the look of places that existed only because the world hadn't remembered to erase them yet. 2 saloons, a chapel, and a crooked telegraph pole buzzing with dying current. But here, tucked behind the general store, was Calder's Press, the last independent paper west of Santa Fe bold enough to print the kind of truth men got shot for carrying. Evelyn dismounted and adjusted her satchel. The negatives were packed tight, wrapped 3 times and stitched beneath the lining of an old army coat. She hadn't slept in over a day. Inside, the press hissed and clanked like a living thing. Machines spat ink. Paper ran in sheets across rollers, soaked in ghost stories and scandal. A wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a monocle perched on his nose looked up from a linotype. "You Harper?" Evelyn nodded. "Colonel James said you were expecting me." He pulled a rolled cigarette from behind his ear. "Name's Calder. Been dying to meet the woman making the agency look like a busted poker bluff." She pulled the bundle from her coat and laid it on the table. "These are the originals, unaltered." Calder unwrapped them with a reverence usually reserved for relics or holy writ. When he saw the first negative, soldiers lying face down in a ravine, their coats burned, their rifles stacked and untouched, his jaw tightened. "I heard stories," he said quietly. "But this—" "There's more," she said, sliding another plate into view. "This one was taken seconds before the raid. You can see the settlers standing down. White flags visible. They still called it hostile engagement." Calder exhaled slowly. "This will burn down half a battalion's worth of lies." Evelyn crossed her arms. "Good. Let it burn." That night, Calder's Press worked non-stop, pages flying. Headlines formed. "Unlawful slaughter in the Redlands, exposing the cover-up." Photos contradict official army reports. Yex Pinkerton agent reveals hidden truth. Evelyn read them in silence, sipping bitter coffee. Lane, still recovering, leaned in the doorway flipping a coin with his good hand. "They'll put a price on your head," he said. "There's already one." He tossed the coin again. "So what now?" She looked out the window at the open road. "Now, we make sure this spreads. Telegraph the northern papers. Get it to St. Louis, Chicago. The world deserves to know." Lane nodded. "You won't be safe." "Was I ever?" He grinned. "Not once." By dawn, the first riders from neighboring towns began arriving, miners, farmers, displaced tribesmen who'd heard rumors of something important being printed in Las Piedras. Calder handed out fresh broadsheets like scripture. Word would spread. Evelyn loaded her gear and tightened her saddle. "You're not staying," Calder said behind her. She shook her head. "I've done what I came to do." "And where will you go?" She mounted Bran slowly. "Wherever the next lie needs unraveling." He held out a folded paper, her own story, printed and ready. "Take one." She hesitated, then took it, folded it carefully. As she turned to ride out, Juniper ran out from the alley, waving something. "Wait." Evelyn pulled the reins. Juniper handed her the harmonica. "You forgot." Evelyn smiled. "Keep it. For the road. You'll come back." "Maybe." Juniper nodded like it was a promise. Then Evelyn rode south, disappearing between the cliffs, dust curling behind her like the closing of a book. And from Calder's Press, her truth rode out ahead of her, carried on ink and wind, louder than gunfire, stronger than fear. The rain caught her 2 days later, sharp, sudden, and silver as needles. Evelyn took shelter beneath a rock outcrop on the edge of a dry riverbed, wrapping her coat tighter, the satchel of documents now tucked beneath oilskin and saddle leather. Every sound in the storm seemed louder out here. The rustle of wet sage, the snort of Bran's breath, the low rumble of distant thunder, like some slumbering beast rolling in its sleep. She hadn't seen another soul since Las Piedras, but she didn't trust that silence. Not anymore. By nightfall the store moved east. Stars returned, peeking through shredded clouds. Evelyn made camp without a fire, eating jerky by moonlight, her rifle laid close. Sleep came in snatches. Just before dawn, she heard it. A crack of twig. Hoofbeats. Not 1, 3. She reached for her rifle slowly. Voices carried over the ridge. Low muffled but close. Then, "Can't be far. Scout said she was headed this way." Agency. She rolled quietly, crawling behind a stand of yucca, staying low. Bran shifted once, but didn't whinny, trained well. The riders appeared as silhouettes against the paling sky, their coats wet and dripping. One dismounted, inspecting the remains of her tracks. "She's smart," one said. Doubled back near the arroyo. But not smart enough, said another. They always get tired. Evelyn's pulse beat steady now, not from fear but clarity. She'd been hunted before. But this time, she wasn't running. She waited until the dismounted man stepped closer, just beyond the second yucca stalk, then rose from her cover in one smooth motion, rifle up. Don't move. He froze. The other spun too slow. She fired once, warning shot into the dirt at the feet of the nearest horse. Bran neighed. The man she held at gunpoint raised his hands. Easy now. You're riding for the agency? Ma'am. I asked a question. Yes. But we ain't here to kill you. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Convince me. The man licked dry lips. We were sent to negotiate. Orders from higher up. Washington, maybe? Your name's making noise. She didn't lower the rifle. You think I'm interested in talks? He tried to smile. I think someone is. From his coat, he slowly drew a sealed envelope. Held it out. Evelyn hesitated, then stepped forward and snatched it, keeping the rifle trained. The seal was an agency. U.S. Office of Military Integrity. Inside, a letter in plain black type. Miss Harper, we have seen the photographs. We have read the reports. There are those in power who seek to silence you. But there are also those who believe your cause exposes more than scandal. It exposes a truth long buried beneath medals and ceremony. If you are willing to meet, there are terms to be discussed. Bring your evidence to Elkhorn Ridge. You will not be alone. DM. She read it twice, then lowered the rifle. Tell your superior, she said, I'll come, but not to surrender. The rider nodded. We figured as much. They turned and rode out, fading into dawn. 3 days later, Evelyn stood atop Elkhorn Ridge, the wind sharp and high. Below, a column of riders approached from the north, half military, half plain clothes. At the front, a man with white hair and a stiff gait dismounted and climbed to meet her. Miss Harper, he said. Colonel, she replied. They shook hands like old enemies forced into alliance by the weight of their own guilt. He glanced at the satchel. You still have them? I always will. He nodded. Then let's talk. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Harper walked into a room not as a fugitive, but as a witness. And the war for truth began to shift. The room inside the stone outpost on Elkhorn Ridge wasn't much, just a table, 2 chairs, and a map nailed to one wall, edges curling from sun and time. But it was the first time Evelyn had sat across from a man with both a government seal and a conscience. Colonel Daniel Monroe was an aging officer with a stiff back and the haunted look of someone who had watched too many truths be buried alive. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, slid one across the table to Evelyn. No cream, no sugar, he said. I've drunk worse, she replied and sipped. The silence between them stretched like a tightrope. Finally he spoke. Your photographs have circulated. Quietly. A few men in Washington want them suppressed. But a few others, men with stars on their shoulders, believe the cost of silence has grown too high. Evelyn leaned back. What do they want from me? Testimony, names, and time. Time for what? To purge the rot, Monroe said, voice low. Or at least stop it from spreading. The Army's been covering incidents like this for too long. Your negatives are a crack in the dam. She studied him. Why help now? He looked down into his cup. Because my son was in that ravine. He died for a lie. I won't let another generation be built on the same. Evelyn said nothing. Monroe stood and walked to the wall map, pointing at a circled area in the Arizona Territory. There's a tribunal forming in Phoenix. Military inquiry. Unofficial, but it has teeth. You appear, present your work, we might see indictments. Maybe even convictions. Maybe, she echoed. And if I do, then we protect you. Witness security. New name, new life. Evelyn stared past him at the window. The sun was rising now, thin light pouring like quiet fire over the ridgeline. I've had enough names, she said. What I want is for the right ones to be remembered, and the wrong ones to be judged. Monroe nodded slowly. Then let's start writing history properly. By that afternoon, Evelyn was escorted under guard toward Phoenix, riding in a covered wagon flanked by mounted scouts. Lane had stayed behind, his wounds too fresh for another ride, but he'd handed her a note before she left. Some truths get carved into stone. Others, you've got to shout until the canyon learns your name. Keep shouting. Lane. She kept the note folded in her coat pocket. The road to Phoenix was long, and rumors traveled ahead of them. A woman who held the proof. A man who died twice chasing her. A satchel filled with stories no bullet could erase. At each checkpoint, scouts saluted her. Children watched wide-eyed as she passed. One old prospector whispered, "Is it true? Did you really shoot a man with a camera around your neck?" Evelyn just tipped her hat. When they camped under the stars, she developed one more print in her portable darkroom, a photo taken back in Cinder Flats. It showed Juniper standing before the saloon, dust on her boots, harmonica in hand, eyes fierce and bright like a flame that refused to die. Evelyn pinned the print inside the wagon canvas. A reminder. She wasn't riding for revenge anymore. She was riding for the ones who couldn't. The tribunal convened in a converted courthouse in Phoenix, its walls still smelling faintly of whitewash and gun oil. There were no journalists, no crowds. Just 10 men behind a long table, 2 flags, and the brittle hush of a place unused to truth. Evelyn sat alone before them. She wore no uniform, no badge, just the worn coat she'd ridden across 3 states in, and the satchel beside her like a chained heart. She unfolded each glass negative with steady fingers, slid each into its wooden frame, and held them to the light. This one, she said, was taken 30 seconds before the first shot. The room didn't move. The faces across from her didn't blink. This one after the smoke. Another image, dead men, unarmed, sprawled across red soil. No weapons drawn. No signs of defense. Evelyn's voice did not rise. It didn't have to. I was hired to destroy these. I chose not to, because what happened wasn't an accident. It was an order. Colonel Monroe stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching. He didn't interfere. He let her speak. And Evelyn told him everything, names, dates, coordinates burned into her memory. She spoke of falsified reports, stolen documents, soldiers who tried to speak up and vanished into reassignment or worse. By the end, the room had changed. The air had thickened. One of the officers at the table leaned forward. "And what do you want, Miss Harper?" She paused. "I want them remembered," she said, "not just as numbers on a report. As people, fathers, sons, mothers who burned with their children in the raid camps. I want this never to be allowed again." The tribunal recessed. For 2 days, Evelyn waited. She walked the edge of town at dawn. She watched the pigeons circle the courthouse roof at noon. At night, she sat beneath the stars and held her camera like a weapon she no longer needed to fire. When the verdict came, it was quiet. 2 commanding officers were stripped of rank. 3 others were summoned to Washington for a deeper inquiry. No one apologized. But a new regulation was issued the next week. All military engagements west of the Rio Grande would henceforth require photographic documentation stored in independent archives. They called it the Harper Clause. Evelyn declined protection. She left Phoenix with the negatives returned to her possession, now stored not in a satchel but in a lockbox under her saddle. Lane met her at a station outside Prescott, a scar on his shoulder, a harmonica in his pocket. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied. "We just cracked the door open." They didn't head north or east. They rode west, toward the ocean neither had seen in years, following an old trail where stagecoaches once ran silver to the ports. Towns faded behind them. Dust rose beneath their horses' hooves. A new world was waiting, and they would arrive with their names intact. At a bluff overlooking the sea, Evelyn stopped. She unpacked the camera one last time, framed the horizon, pressed the shutter. The image that emerged showed nothing but sky and sea, and light so bright it almost bled. She pinned it next to Juniper's photo, inside her journal. Some stories needed to end not with fire or gunshot, but with silence, with peace, with breath. And Evelyn Harper finally let herself exhale.